Just before 6 o'clock on the morning of December 26, 1996, a woman in Boulder, Colorado, called 911 to report that her 6-year-old daughter had been taken from their home. By the end of that same day, the little girl's body would be found in their own basement, and one of the most infamous murder cases in American history would already, quietly, be falling apart. Because the truth about the death of JonBenet Ramsey is not really a mystery about a stranger in the night. It is the story of how a case was lost in its first 12 hours, and why, nearly 30 years later, no one has ever been charged. To understand how the most scrutinized child murder in America went unsolved, you have to go back to that house and to the morning everything went wrong. The Ramseys were a wealthy, successful family. John Ramsey ran a thriving computer company, and his daughter JonBenet was a bright blonde 6-year-old who competed in child beauty pageants, a detail that would later turn this private tragedy into a national obsession. On Christmas night, the family had come home from a party and gone to bed. The next morning, Patsy Ramsey said she came down the back staircase and found a note waiting for her on a step. It was not a normal ransom note, and almost everything about it was strange. Most real ransom notes are short, a few hurried words. This one was nearly 3 handwritten pages long, written on paper from a notepad inside the Ramseys' own house, with a pen from inside the house. It claimed JonBenet had been kidnapped by a small foreign faction, and it demanded a ransom of $118,000. That number was the detail that has haunted investigators ever since, because $118,000 was almost exactly the amount of a work bonus John Ramsey had recently received, a figure an outside stranger would have had no way of knowing. And yet there was no kidnapping. The child was still in the house the entire time. What happened over the next several hours did more damage to the case than any criminal ever could have. Patsy called 911, and soon the house began to fill with people. Friends were called and came over. A victim's advocate arrived, police officers were present, but in the chaos and confusion of what everyone believed was a kidnapping, no one sealed off the home. People walked through rooms, touched surfaces, sat on furniture, and moved freely through what was, in reality, an active crime scene. Every fingerprint, every fiber, every trace of evidence was being smeared, contaminated, or destroyed, hour after hour, while everyone waited for a kidnapper's phone call that would never come. And then there was the basement. Early that morning, a police officer had walked through the house, but had not opened a particular door in the basement that led to a small windowless room. Hours passed, the promised ransom call never came. Finally, in the early afternoon, a detective asked John Ramsey and a friend to search the house from top to bottom, to look for anything unusual. John went straight down to the basement, opened that door, and within moments found his daughter's body. She had been dead for hours, lying just beyond a door that had gone unopened all morning. What he did next was understandable for a grieving father, and devastating for the investigation. John Ramsey picked up his daughter's body and carried her upstairs, laying her on the floor of the living room. In that instant, whatever evidence the body and the basement scene might have preserved, its exact position, the undisturbed traces around it, was forever altered. A crime scene that should have been photographed, measured, and protected by forensic specialists had instead been walked through by a house full of people and finally disturbed by the victim's own father. The most important 12 hours of any murder investigation, the hours when evidence is freshest, had been lost. When the autopsy was finally performed, it revealed how she had died, and it only deepened the mystery. The official autopsy, released the following summer, found that JonBenet had died from asphyxiation by strangulation, combined with a severe blow to the head that had fractured her skull with a crack measuring roughly 8.5 inches. Around her neck was a garrote, a crude tool made from a length of cord and a broken paintbrush handle, and there were ligature marks on her neck and one wrist. There was also evidence of sexual assault, but no semen was recovered. It was a brutal, deliberate killing, and the manner of it would fuel competing theories for decades, with no physical scene left intact to prove any of them. But there was one piece of evidence that survived, and it has become the single greatest obstacle to ever closing the case. On JonBenet's clothing, investigators found DNA belonging to an unknown male, someone who has never been identified and never matched to anyone in any criminal database. For years, this unknown DNA was treated as the fingerprint of a phantom intruder. In 2008, The Boulder District Attorney went so far as to send the Ramsey family a letter, formally clearing John, Patsy, and their son Burke, based largely on that DNA. But that exoneration has been fiercely disputed ever since. Other experts and a later district attorney argued that the sample was not a clean profile from a killer at all, but a tiny degraded mixture of genetic material from more than one person, the kind of trace DNA that can end up on mass-produced clothing from the factory or from innocent contact. In other words, the one piece of evidence everyone hoped would name the killer may be too small, too degraded, and too ambiguous to ever point to anyone at all. To this day, it sits below the threshold that modern genetic genealogy needs to build a family tree, the technique that has cracked so many other cold cases. And so the case settled into a strange and bitter limbo that has never ended. In 1999, a grand jury secretly voted to indict JonBenet's parents on charges related to her death, but the district attorney at the time refused to sign the indictment, believing he could never win the case in court. That decision stayed hidden for over a decade. The family was publicly cleared by one prosecutor and quietly accused by a grand jury, and both things were true at once. Patsy Ramsey died of cancer in 2006, never charged, still living under a cloud of suspicion she always denied. No suspect has ever been arrested. A man named John Mark Carr falsely confessed to the killing in 2006, but his DNA did not match, and his claims collapsed almost immediately. The reason this case never lets go of the public imagination is the same reason it was never solved. It had everything a story is not supposed to have: a wealthy family, a beautiful child, a bizarre handwritten note, a body in the basement on the day after Christmas, and a crime scene so thoroughly compromised that the truth may have been erased before the sun went down. In recent years, new documentaries and renewed calls for advanced DNA testing have brought the case roaring back into public view, and John Ramsey has continued to push police to apply the newest genetic technology to that stubborn, degraded sample. The Boulder police say the investigation remains open and active, but everyone involved understands the hard truth at the center of it. The evidence that could have answered everything was lost in the first 12 hours, in the panic and confusion of a house that was never sealed, and you cannot test, decades later, what was destroyed before anyone thought to protect it. JonBenet Ramsey would be in her 30s today. Her killer has never been named, and may never be. This was not a perfect crime committed by a criminal mastermind. It was an ordinary tragedy turned unsolvable by the choices of the first 12 hours, a reminder that sometimes justice is not defeated by the cleverness of the guilty, but by the mistakes of the moment. If this story stayed with you, and if you believe the most haunting stories are the ones that actually happened, then subscribe, because we have many more true stories to tell.